Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going to break down the intense controversy around new anti-discrimination rules in India's universities and get into why the Supreme Court suddenly stepped in and hit the brakes.
So let's just dive right in. This one question from India's top court, it really cuts to the very heart of this huge nationwide debate about equality, division, and justice on college campuses.
So, to really get a handle on these new rules, we first have to understand the problem they were actually designed to solve, this persistent and frankly tragic issue of caste-based discrimination in higher education.
Now look at this timeline. What's so important here is that these rules didn't just come out of the blue. No, they were a direct response to some absolutely heartbreaking events and a very specific order from the Supreme Court to create a safer environment for students.
Okay, get a load of this number. 75%. Now, this comes from an IIT Delhi study, and while the full statistics aren't public, it suggested that a staggering 75% of students feel like they face discrimination on campus. I mean, wow. That number alone really shows you why officials felt they had to do something, and fast.
All right, so what were these new rules from the University Grants Commission all about? Let's take a look at the framework that was supposed to protect students, but well, it ended up pretty much splitting the country in two.
And just in case you're not familiar, the UGC is a big deal. Think of them as the main regulatory body for higher ed in India. They set the standards, they give out the grants, basically what they say goes. And that's exactly why these new rules blew up into such a huge national issue almost overnight.
Okay, so this new system, it was clearly designed to have some real teeth. I mean, just look at the speed built into it. A complaint gets filed and a committee has to meet within 24 hours. A report has to be done in 15 days, and then the university has to act within another 7. The goal was pretty obvious, right? No more bureaucratic foot dragging. They wanted to force accountability.
And if you thought the timeline was intense, check out the consequences. We are not talking about a simple slap on the wrist here. This is serious stuff. You could get kicked out of your degree program, lose access to funding, and for the university itself, they could literally lose their official recognition. I mean, that's an existential threat.
But here's the twist. These rules, the ones that were meant to protect people, they set off this immediate and just fierce backlash. A lot of people started arguing that instead of fixing the problem, these rules were actually going to tear society apart.
And this really gets to the heart of the whole debate. You had two completely different ways of looking at it. On one hand, people saw a much-needed shield for students who've been historically vulnerable. But on the other hand, people saw it as a divisive weapon. Opponents even called it a black law, basically an unjust, repressive rule. They were worried it would be used to settle old scores and would end up carving caste differences into stone instead of getting rid of them.
And wow, this quote that went viral, it just captures the absolute intensity of the opposition. The argument here was that the rules basically assumed you were guilty from the get-go, especially if you were from a caste that wasn't designated as disadvantaged. It denied due process, and that created this really powerful story of unfairness.
And make no mistake, this wasn't just a couple of angry tweets. The backlash was a massive wave of public protest. You had student groups, well-known public figures, even government officials all speaking out, demanding that these rules get thrown out completely.
So, with the entire country basically at odds over this, where does the whole mess end up? Well, it landed right back where it all began, at the Supreme Court.
And here's the key moment. The court essentially just hit the pause button. Right before these rules were supposed to go into effect across the entire country, the Supreme Court stepped in and put a stop to them.
So, what was the court's reasoning? Well, it was less about why the rules were made and more about how they were written. The judges basically said they were too unclear and ambiguous. They were really worried that the rules could be easily misused and, as written, might actually create more division instead of less.
And this part is pretty amazing, actually. It shows you just how controversial these rules had become. You had leaders from completely opposite sides of the political fence. We're talking Priyanka Chaturvedi from the opposition, and even a major Dalit leader like Mayawati. They all came out and praised the court's decision. They saw it as a necessary move to keep the peace.
All right, let's get to the final piece of this whole story. And this one raises a really deep question, not just about these specific rules, but about the entire judicial process.
This is a really critical point that our source material brings up. You have to ask, right? Why would the court order these rules to be made in the first place, only to turn around and stop them when public pressure heats up? It kind of makes you wonder about the influence of public opinion on these big decisions.
And according to the source material, this might not be a one-off thing. They point to other really high-profile cases where it seemed like court decisions changed after a big public outcry. It raises this uncomfortable question: is external pressure starting to affect how consistent our courts are?
And that really leaves us with the big, unanswered question at the center of all of this. How does a country like India fight for fairness and equity for all its citizens without accidentally creating even deeper divides? It's an incredibly delicate balancing act, and finding that perfect balance, well, that remains the ultimate challenge.